Well, I think we could probably get started. What do
Up
you
to
think?
you. Great. Okay.
All right, so let's get started. First off, thank you everyone for coming and being here, and huge thank you to Jacquelyn. I want to first also shout out all the East End libraries who are also participating. So thank you to Hampton Bays Public Library, Riverhead Free Library, North Shore Public Library, West Hampton Free Library, Mattatuck Laurel Library, Southold Free Library, Port Jeff Library, Amagansett Free Library, and Flord Memorial. If there's anyone who I forgot, please let me know. And this Zoom will be recorded. Please keep yourselves muted while the presentation is going on. Feel free to put questions in the chat, and when we're at the end, we will have a Q&A, answer any questions that you have. So huge welcome to Jacquelyn Ottman. Welcome to Using Them Up, How the World Makes Leftovers Taste Like New. Our presenter this evening is Jacquelyn Ottman, who is joining us from New York. Jackie is an advocate for reducing food waste, a culinary historian, and a dedicated home. Some of you may be familiar with Jackie. She first presented a Friday night dialogue to us in 2020 entitled Making the Most of Your Pandemic Cooking. She went on to write a book entitled Connecting from Our Quarantine Kitchen, My Shelter Island Pandemic Story, which she's holding up right now. Tonight, she's back with some delicious ideas for helping us reduce food waste. On Long Island, residents throw away an estimated 200 pounds of food per person per year. And with landfills at near capacity, the need for waste reduction of all kinds has become increasingly urgent. In her presentation, Jackie will provide new inspiration in the form of beloved dishes that have evolved around the world and through the centuries as perfect and delectable containers for leftovers. So huge thank you to Jacquelyn for being here.
And thank you, Liz, for that nice introduction. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everyone, for coming and for giving me the opportunity tonight to share some ideas that I have with you for fighting food waste on my favorite island besides Manhattan, where I'm sitting tonight. Like many of you here, I hate to see good food go to waste. Of course, during the pandemic, none of us could waste a morsel. I'm giving this talk this evening and writing a book about the subject because we now have a lot more and different reasons to use up our leftovers. And my hope is that you'll try my ideas out and in turn inspire others to do the same. Together, we can help reduce perfectly good food from going to waste, and hopefully make our food culture more leftovers friendly once again without a war, a depression, or a pandemic going on. So for the particular inspiration I'm going to share, like Liz mentioned, are 7 dishes that have been used by food cultures around the world for centuries to transform what was left over from a previous meal into something new and delicious. I'm going to conclude with 3 of my top wishes for things that we can do as a country and a society to make our food culture be more leftovers friendly. But first, I want to start with a little context. You know the stats that are about to come. Food waste is a huge problem in the US and, of course, around the world. A third of all food that's purchased in America, that's like 1 out of 3 shopping bags worth of groceries that come home, wind up in the trash. And the pity is that much of this food is totally fit for human consumption, and it's not being diverted to feed people who really need it. And then when it gets into a landfill, as you can see in the top right picture, it degrades into methane, CH4, a gas that's up to 80 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than even carbon dioxide. Now, why is this important on the east end of Long Island? Among many reasons, your Brookhaven landfill is near capacity, and your towns, like all towns in New York State, must reduce greenhouse gas emissions 40% by 2030. So, and food insecurity and other reasons as well, besides escalating food prices for everybody. So I define leftovers as the edible remains of a meal stored with the intention of eating them later. So this includes what's left in the casserole, as well as the ingredients that didn't make it to the mixing bowl from a recipe. That half a container of heavy cream that always seems to be left, and the rest of that big bunch of celery. Why do we have to buy an entire bunch of celery? These days, we're eating in restaurants or ordering in as much as we're eating at home. So leftovers also need to encompass the food we bring home in a doggy bag, as well as any prepared foods left over from a food delivery. So, who generates leftovers? Us, all of us. Just looking at New York City, where I have statistics, the Natural Resources Defense Council has found that over half, 54%, of all food waste that we throw out winds up in a landfill and it's generated within our own homes, whether it's from cooking too much for company, over ordering on takeout, or stashing uneaten food in the fridge but never wind up eating it. Households throw away more food than restaurants, cafeterias, catering halls, and all the other places that prepare food to eat outside combined. Of course, restaurants and the like, professionals on staff who know how to use up their leftovers and have a strong economic incentive to do so. Speaking of economic incentives, so do we households. This all adds up to real money. As you can see on the chart on the left, a whopping $1,866 of what the average American household spends on food goes to waste. On the right, you'll see that 23% of this represents perfectly good food that was thrown out in the form of prepared foods and leftovers. Two of the reasons why food scrap collection is now mandatory in New York City, maybe some of you know that, is because of its impacts on climate change. About 99% of all the food that goes to waste in New York City is still going to landfills, as well as costing us millions of dollars to transport all that heavy food waste to landfills out of state and upstate, where the 25,000 tons of waste that we New Yorkers generate each and every day winds up. And I'm sure you have, comparable stats for the east end of Long Island. They're, frightening. So, how can we encourage people to eat up these leftovers? I have lots of ideas that I'm going to share, but first we have to get everyone over the hurdles, and there are many of them. Three of the biggest hurdles to getting people to use up leftovers are the following. Number one, plenty of Americans these days simply don't know how to cook, much less know how to reheat their leftovers. How many young people do you know who think the best way to reheat pizza is in a microwave oven? Relatedly, many Americans don't know how to properly store food so that it will last in the fridge a few days, or better yet, the freezer. And then, of course, there's the emotional side of all of this, the fear of getting sick, which of course could be real, or even the shame experienced by some when asking for a doggy bag. You might ask, Jackie, what about composting? Composting is getting a lot of attention these days, and it's a very good thing because it creates an important soil amendment, or like what we're doing here in the city, turning it into biofuel to heat homes. But is composting the best possible way to dispose of leftovers? Not really. According to this chart that you see here from the EPA, composting is just a step or two above landfilling for edible food waste disposal. but it may surprise you to see how far down on the list it is. The truth is, you definitely want to compost food that may be inedible, but you don't want to compost food that's perfectly edible and nutritious. That goes way up the scale. As you can see on the darker green areas on this left side of the chart, you really want to prevent food from going to waste in the first place. And if you've got food that's perfectly good to eat, you want to feed people by donating it or upcycling it into saleable, edible products, even feeding animals. So that's where transforming the leftovers comes in. Now, there's some good news. The leftovers seem to be having a moment right now. There's a lot of concern among the UN and government officials that food waste needs to be tackled now. During the pandemic, some of these images show leftovers were all over social media, the morning shows, and lots of celebrity chefs and food writers still like to talk about their own love of leftovers. I'd love to see all of these creative efforts really scared up because people are no longer learning to cook within their homes. Granny is more likely to live in California than upstairs, and mom and dad now both have jobs. Regardless of who's doing the teaching, I think the best kind of encouragement we can give to Americans is to simply demonstrate how leftovers can be delicious. I ask you, whoever throws away delicious food? My research shows that inspiration abounds for making leftovers delicious, especially if we consider the 7 dishes that food cultures around the world have been using to transform their own leftovers for centuries. These dishes represent perfect inspiration since Americans are always up for trying new foods. We love food inspired by other cultures, and everybody loves to eat food that reminds them of their own native food culture. Hungry to learn more? Let's take a deep dive into each of these 7 dishes. Starting in ancient times, food cultures in China, India, and the Middle East have developed specific dishes for transforming the leftover bits of this and that, the odds and the ends from last night's dinner, into something entirely new for tomorrow's hearty breakfast or lunch. Over the centuries, many of these dishes that have been quite inventive have spread around the world, taking on the flavors and the textures of the region they were in. What are these dishes? Nothing exotic, nothing archaic, and no jello mold among them. You know them and you love them. They are the savory pies and tarts that represent a perfect spot to tuck in the leftover chicken and veggies. The fried rice that the Chinese have ingeniously been using for centuries to repurpose day-old rice. They're the savory soups and stews that can be recharged seemingly forever. They're the flavorful curries that were first created in China that now have found their way onto more tables in the UK than bangers and mash. There are also the grain bowls, beloved by monks for balance, that the health conscious among us eat today to stay fit. There are also the omelets and the frittatas, chock full of leftover meats and vegetables that we happily consume at our favorite brunch with a mimosa or two. And finally, they're the breaded fish cakes, golden fried with an egg on top, that make a great meal anytime. You all likely have enjoyed every one of these 7 dishes. But what you may not have tried yet are the many exciting permutations of these dishes that have sprung up around the world over the centuries. That's the news I want to share with you during this presentation, starting with the most ancient and beloved leftover of all, soups. The scorch marks on the ceramic pot that you see on the bottom left suggest that soups may have been invented in China during an ice age as long ago as 20,000 BC. Perhaps starting as a poor man's stew without much more in the bowl than some weak flavorings, soup is universal. It is consumed by the young and the old, the healthy and the sick. Every food culture around the world has soups of all kinds, colors, and textures. And each one of those food cultures has its own soup culture, the traditions, occasions, etiquette, accoutrement for serving and eating soup. Even TV characters like Seinfeld's beloved Soup Nazi. Soup is ubiquitous. It's featured on menus from diners all the way up to five-star restaurants. It's waiting for you on a supermarket shelf, ready to eat from a can, a cup, a cube, a pouch, and a packet. Soup has even gone to the moon. And of course, it's the backbone of soup kitchens because soups are at once so economical and nutritious. Today, there are hot soups and cold soups, clear soups and cream soups. There are soups for breakfast like Japanese miso soup, cold soups that make a perfect summertime lunch like, of course, Spanish gazpacho, even soups for dessert like Hungarian sour cherry meglavesh. If you want to mix things up a bit in your own kitchen, you can turn the remains of that roast chicken this week into Peru's green chicken soup called Aguadito de Polo, flavored with cilantro and topped with lime. Two soups that are popular in the city these days are Vietnamese pho, a meal in a bowl, and of course Ukrainian borscht made from beets. Soup's versatility makes it a great dish to use up any ingredient you have on hand. Just ask world famous chef Jacques Pepin, whose recipe for fridge soup is his own go to for a cold winter's night. And if you put your email in the chat, I'd be happy to send you his recipe along with the other ones I'm going to show throughout the rest of the presentation. Now, like soup's first cousin, stew, making soup is super easy. Just like the folks in the stone soup fable discovered, you can make soup from just about anything. You start with a pre-made stock or simply buy broth in a store. Add whatever meat, poultry, fish, or vegetables and seasonings that you like. Simmer to reduce and concentrate the flavor. If you like, add a little milk or cream just before serving, or puree it all in a blender for a more textured result. Now, let's turn to another super popular dish that makes a perfect container for leftovers, eggs. Dishes made from eggs, like omelets in France and frittatas in Italy, have savory as well as sweet roots that trace back to ancient Persia and Rome. Typically cooked in a stovetop skillet or baked, it's the eggs that act as the binder for the small pieces of meat and veggies that make them all taste so good. Enjoy omelets and frittatas for breakfast, brunch, lunch, or a light dinner. Now, we have Napoleon to thank for omelets being so popular in France. It is believed that he was served the first known French omelet by an innkeeper in Bessières, France. Immediately enamored, Napoleon requested the innkeeper prepare them for his entire army. I hope he had plenty of eggs on hand. The French pride themselves on omelets that are flat and golden yellow, like the one you see in the picture on the top left, but their American counterparts, served as Denver or Western omelets, are, like the picture next to it, a bit crusty on the outside, and they burst with red peppers, ham, and other hearty ingredients. Omelets served in the rest of the world have their own distinct colors, shapes, and sizes. Italian frittatas are big and round as the skillet they're baked in. Spain's tortilla de patatas are almost as white as the potatoes they contain. Korea's, and I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, gyaranmari is flavored with diced onion, ham, and sesame oil, and then it's rolled before cut into pieces. Iran's kuku sabzi takes the cake for the prettiest frittata or omelet. It's green and herby and sprinkled with bright red cranberries, while Japan's omurice is stuffed with flavored rice and dressed up with a zigzag of ketchup. A leftover game day egg bake is a great way to use up what's left over from the Super Bowl party. For those of you not familiar, Super Bowl parties, statistics wise, is the third most largest leftover generating occasion in America after Thanksgiving and Christmas. For your own everyday leftovers, you can try cookbook chef Julia Tershin's customizable kitchen sink frittata featured in her cookbook, Simply Julia. Rachel Ray is a big frittata fan too. She makes frittatas from, of all things, leftover pasta. Her pasta frittata looks somewhat like a pizza, which she touts is fun and easy to make and great for any meal. To make a frittata yourself, simply whisk together some eggs with cream and seasonings, drop in whatever ingredients and leftovers you have on hand, and bake it right in the skillet until the eggs have cooked through. Our third dish, grain bowls, is being reinvented as we speak with a younger, health-conscious eater in mind. Grain bowls were created in Central to East Asia. They're ever adaptable and trace their roots to the Buddha and later on to monks who would eat a balanced diet from simple ingredients collected in their bowls. Quite reminiscent of our own colorful salads, grain bowls are traditionally served in a simple, flat, wide bowl that shows off the variety of gorgeous textures and colors. Today, grain bowls are an Instagram favorite. They're eaten for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and enjoy a growing following around the world, led by celebrity chefs and athletes who value their balanced nutrition. Martha Stewart coined the term Buddha Bowl in her 2013 cookbook, Meatless. As you can see here, grain bowls can be made with literally endless variations, such as the ones that many cultures have developed with their local flares. Let's dig in. Up at the top, Jamaica jerk chicken grain bowl is flavored with mango and lime. A Moroccan chicken or lamb grain bowl is seasoned with a special Moroccan spice blend. Japanese donbori consists of slices of fish, chicken, or beef sauteed with vegetables. And then there's Korean bibimbap that's topped with an egg. Grain bowls for breakfast? Why not? Tomorrow morning, you can try Gwyneth Paltrow's breakfast grain bowl featured in her cookbook, It's All Good. Perhaps you've already tried some grain bowls that are trending in the US now, like the coconut quinoa salmon power bowl that LeBron James favors before a big game, and a Hawaiian poke bowl inspired by Japanese rice bowls that feature fresh caught raw tuna, or invent your own. It's easy. The first step in making a grain bowl is to pick a grain base like rice, quinoa, or barley. Then add veggies and any choice of a protein like meat, fish, legumes like chickpeas or beans, or a veggie protein like tofu, falafel, egg, or seitan. Drizzle on a dressing or a sauce, and then garnish with raw vegetables and add some crunch like panko or nuts. Now let's travel to China. Like the visual on the bottom left corner suggests, it takes a lot of hard work to grow rice. An ancient Chinese proverb warns against wasting even one grain. So it's not surprising that the Chinese developed fried rice over 1900 years ago in the city of Yangzhou in eastern Jiangsu province. There, fried rice is still called chow fan, meaning saute meal. A quick and casual meal, fried rice is made with leftover rice and often other leftover ingredients, including protein and some form of a green. Traditionally, it's all combined in a wok and seasoned with soy sauce. Usually eaten for breakfast or lunch, fried rice is a typical Asian street food facilitated by a wok's high heat and portability. In America, fried rice has a long history stretching back to the California Gold Rush of 1849. And this is interesting. The first known appearance on restaurant menus was the one you can see here from Harlem's Cotton Club in 1925. Intriguingly, 2,000 years later, fried rice keeps evolving and permutating. Recent variations, like the one you see in the bottom right corner, is actually made with cauliflower rice, suggesting that fried rice doesn't even have to be made with traditional rice. We Americans are not the only ones who've benefited from a tasty Chinese migration. Fried rice has been traveling with the Chinese across all the other continents too. Now there are countless variations, so everyone on the planet can use up not only the day-old rice, but all the little tidbits from an entire meal that are likely left over too. Examples, starting with the images up in the top row, are Korean kimchi bokikimbap, Peruvian arroz chaufa, and Cuban arroz frito, and Indian tawa pulao. Vegan? No problem. There's a fried rice for that. If delicacies are your thing, you can now order fried rice spiked with lobster or Wagyu beef. Trying to avoid fried foods altogether? No worries. Top Chef Stephanie Izzard has a recipe for making fried rice on a baking sheet instead of a wok. Whether it's a simple dish prepped in the street or in the toniest restaurant, fried rice is super simple to make. It takes just 4 steps. Saute some veggies or meat in a skillet or a wok, scramble in an egg or two to bind the tidbits together, and then mix in your day-old rice. Then add some favorite flavors like soy sauce or sriracha and garnish with cilantro or green onions. Now it's on to India and to look at their favorite way to repurpose leftovers, curry. You know curry. It's a stew-like dish consisting of meat, fish, vegetables, or lentils, all cooked in a sauce. But did you know that it originated in India in 2600 BC? Superbly capable of accommodating nearly any kind of leftover, curries can be flavored with spices similar to those in curry powder, which is popular in the UK. But in India, curries are often made with the more pungent spice blend called garam masala. Thanks to the British, curries have spread around the world and have adapted to local tastes. Curries have a long tradition in India, so let's start there. Across India, there are numerous regional curries. Starting up at the top, examples include, and I don't know if I'm going to pronounce these correctly, Goan pork vindaloo, flavored with chilies, garlic, and vinegar, puri masala, packed with boiled potatoes and lots of onion, spices, and lentils, and Punjabi lobia curry that features black-eyed beans. Jamaicans spice up their curry with a spice blend similar to jerk seasoning. In Thailand, they enjoy a red curry with typical flavors of lemongrass, Thai chili, and fish sauce. The Japanese savor their kaku shaiji, a sweet curry with a thicker sauce, often containing unique ingredients like caramelized apples, onions, or even coffee, chocolate, vanilla, butter, and chutney. Now, curry became popular in the UK because of the large number of immigrants from South Asia that arrived there after World War II. But it is now so ingrained in UK food culture that chicken tikka masala is actually Britain's national dish, and celebrity chefs create signature dishes. Although its ingredients may sound exotic, curry can be rather simple to make. Cook your protein or other main ingredients, then add spices, follow by adding some broth or coconut milk, and add some vegetables. Let them all simmer slowly until the smell is irresistible. Take some advice from UK celebrity chef Gordon Ramsay this year and go bold with your Thanksgiving leftovers. He advises forget soggy sandwiches and instead opt for a really flavorsome Thai turkey curry. He believes it makes for a real contrast to the traditional Boxing Day offering in the UK, bursting with zingy lemongrass, coriander, and chili. Now, to help us pick up a little time for the Q&A tonight, I'm going to skip over the next two dishes, but just suffice it to say that savory pies and tarts go back to the ancient days in ancient Egypt and Rome when the crusts were inedible, and the concept of pie was simply to preserve the contents inside. And the last dish is fish cakes, which were likely invented as far back ago as 4,000 years, long before McDonald's fish sticks were ever imagined, and they'll be around long after we forget McDonald's fish sticks. There's plenty more inspiration for even more variations on these 7 great dishes. Just check out the numerous cookbooks that can help us explore these resilient creations further. The one in the top left corner, entitled Soup Bible, contains over 200 recipes from around the world and is available at the Shelter Island Library. So I hope by now you're not just hungry, but also curious enough to ask, what leftovers might I have on hand right now that I can reinvent for tomorrow's breakfast or lunch? While you're eating your tasty creation to be, I'd love it if you would think about some bigger questions about how we can make ours a more leftover friendly food culture going forward. So I'm going to conclude by sharing my 3 top ideas for integrating these 7 dishes into our food culture and in general engaging our broader society in the mission of preventing food waste. Like ideas for all new policies, programs, and products, they take the form of a wish. Number 1, I wish that every child in America could learn how to transform their leftovers for life. In the past, children learned how to cook in their family's kitchen, helping out parents and grandparents making the family meals. Recipes were passed down from generation to generations. Memories were created as much as meals. Sadly, as we shift cooking responsibilities from mom and grandmom to takeout and out-of-home eateries, as a society, we're sadly losing our cooking skills. We have a Take Our Kids to Work Day, but perhaps we need a National Teach Our Kids to Cook Day, built around the lofty goal of making sure every child in America graduates from high school knowing how to make at least one of these dishes as a lifelong go-to for their own leftovers. My second wish is that I wish that every recipe published in America would come with tips for storing, reheating, and transforming what's left over. Who better to help us understand how to best manage the leftovers than the food writers and chefs and recipe developers who put these recipes together? Thank you, Melissa Clark of the Times, for doing this in many of the recipes that you share. And my third wish is that restaurants and cafeterias would insert tips for reheating and storage into every food delivery and doggy bag. Let's start by using up that valuable real estate that's now empty on the inside cover of pizza boxes. Domino's in Australia already does this. What about us? And I have many more ideas I'd be happy to share. But this concludes my presentation for tonight. Thank you so much for listening. To help empower all of you to go forth, experiment, and enjoy, I've prepared a free PDF of those recipes that I mentioned during this presentation from Jacques Pepin and Gordon Ramsay and others. To get yourself a copy, simply put your email in the chat or send me an email right to this Gmail that you're seeing on the screen. And of course, feel free to contact me directly with any questions or to share a favorite leftover recipe of your own. Now, let's talk about any comments or questions that you may have and how we can start to transform things right on Shelter Island and the East End starting tonight.
Well, I'll start. So what caused your interest in food waste?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think the answer, like Lady Gaga, was I was born this way. When I was 4 years old, I instinctively knew that I could drag the board games that I found on my neighbor's curb home because I hated to see things go to waste. And I said, okay, if they're there, they can be mine. And when I got home, my brother and sister saw me with these board games, and I was so proudly showing them off. And they just were horrified and started to call me Junkie Jackie. And I've been Junkie Jackie ever since. But also, Liz, I've been always interested in food. I've been cooking my entire life. My family had one of those meat businesses in the meatpacking district in New York. In fact, I also give tours of the meatpacking district in case anybody's in town and wants to stroll around with me. But from the time I was a little girl, we were taken to the Ottman and Company's customers, and I just developed a love of good food. And I hate to see things go to waste, so I put the two things together. Any other questions?
Yes, it looks like Mary has a question.
Mary does have a question, but I don't know how to put myself on video. There I am, I think. I don't know if you can see me, can you?
I can see you, and I see
Okay.
your hand raised. You're terrific. Fire
Okay.
away, Mary.
Well, I have to say you are so inspiring
Oh,
and
Joe,
so
thank you.
thought-provoking
Thank
thought-provoking, really, and provocative. So thank you for that and getting me thinking on ways around me that I can make a difference because of you and your thoughts and the food waste and the methane, everything. One thing that kind of a more personal thing is that I'm out here on the North Shore and I could really use a tip on fish cakes and how to hold them together.
Well, the only and maybe and everybody else is feel free to chime in here. You know, we're all the food experts here. As I understand fish cakes, the trick is potatoes and maybe
Right.
adding a little egg, maybe even adding a little mayonnaise. Does anyone else have any other ideas for helping Mary out? glomming the
Well,
fish
yeah,
cakes together.
I mean,
And
I
then
do
the
a lot of fish
breadcrumbs
cakes.
too.
The egg is good. I'd never heard of mayo. And
Little
also
mayo.
another just question in there is that when I make them, it's quite a bit of them. So I like to wrap them and freeze them. And I wonder if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Anybody got ideas on how to best freeze fish cakes? I say wrap them up. You want to get rid of the air. You want to get rid
Right,
of air
right,
pockets. So I
right.
would say wrap them tight in saran wrap and individually and put them in the freezer.
And the mayo, I guess, would be different for me. Breadcrumbs.
Well, you'd roll them in the breadcrumbs before you'd fry them.
Okay.
And maybe you put breadcrumbs, I think a lot of restaurants do that to stretch the fish, is put some breadcrumbs in there too.
Okay.
And the
Thank you
breadcrumbs and
so
the eggs
much.
will bond together.
Thank
Sure,
you.
Mary.
Thank
Yep.
you so much.
I see Ellen has her hand raised, and we also have some questions coming in from the chat. So
I think that she could try putting wax paper in between the fish cakes for freezing. Make it easy to separate them,
That makes sense.
like you do for hamburgers.
Great idea.
we have a question from Anne. She asks, do you consider food scraps, peels, to be edible? Should we be making vegetable broth from what I normally throw into the compost bowl?
Oh, excellent question, Anne, and it was so wonderful to speak with you this morning. There are peels that you can put into vegetable broth are edible because you can put them into vegetable broth. You can put so many things that aren't edible into broth, like bones, for example, right? And get the flavor out of those. So you want to strain it all out and then put it into the compost, but you really want to get as much of the flavor and the nutrition out of every morsel that comes into your home. Did I answer you, Anne, or do you want to get on and talk a
Well,
little bit
can
more?
you hear me?
There you are. Yes,
Yes,
I
I,
see you
I
too.
understand that's the right thing to do. It's time consuming and it just seems like, I feel so guilty throwing things, but I try to minimize it, of course, but still I'm throwing away food that does have nutrition that could be used.
That's right. Well, I've read a zillion books on, zero waste kitchen and waste-free kitchen and all these different titles that are out there. And the number one tip is start a bag that you put in your freezer and just keep loading it up with bones and peels and broccoli stalks and anything that you're not, putting in your recipe and your meals, and then use it for stock, and then put it into the compost.
I had one comment about the fish cakes. I think sometimes I've read that refrigerating it, once you've made things into patties, if you refrigerate them for a while, that then they will not fall apart as much.
That's a very good idea. That is true, that the freezing does help. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for such practical information. It's very
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for your service. And while you've got the microphone, do you want to tell people a little bit about your initiative? Please, everybody would be inspired to hear that.
okay. Well, I talked to Jacquelyn this morning. I would live in Cutchogue on the North Fork, and I am the co-site director of an organization called Food Rescue US, which is headquartered in Connecticut and has local chapters throughout the country. And basically, we utilize volunteers to pick up food from local farms or bakeries or 7-Elevens and deliver it to human services agencies, food banks, community centers, Head Start, places where they service people who have food insecurity. We don't operate on Shelter Island right now. I know there is a group called Food Rescue on the South Fork, and also on the North Fork. And last summer, we just got started on the North Fork. We collected about 9,000 pounds of vegetables from a handful of farms over the summer. But this winter, we've basically collected bagels. And the amount of baked products that go into black plastic bags and end up in the landfill is truly amazing. With only 3 bagel stores, we collect probably 400 to 500 pounds of leftover bagels each week. It's just amazing. So there is a lot of food waste from a lot of different sources.
And if I can continue, embellish on what you're saying too, we got into a conversation this morning about the cultural appropriateness of foods. And there are a number of workers or residents in the North Fork. You've mentioned this morning Honduras and Ecuador, who could use this food, but they don't eat bagels.
Well, they may eat them if they're hungry
mismatch
enough.
there. Yeah.
But it's not.
It's a big challenge is cultural appropriateness with the food insecure.
So thank you. I'll put the website address for this organization in the chat
Yeah.
box.
Perfect. I see a question there says, I do a lot of juicing. Any ideas what to do with the pulp fiber that's left? Did everyone hear that question? Does anyone have a suggestion for that attendee? What do you do with the pulp fiber that's left over? Mike, can you make marmalade or jelly out of pulp fiber? I see you there, Mike. Mike is my cousin and he makes the best marmalade in the world. Hi, Mike. What do you do with the pulp fiber after the juicing? Can you do anything with that?
No idea. I've never juiced anything.
No.
No.
Okay.
Whatever I probably grind up ends up in the recipe.
Okay. All right. So that one we're going to have to get back to you on. I love a good question that still makes me learn. Any other questions that we have in the chat here? On prep day, I have a bowl for compost and a bowl for stock. Yes. One good thing, well, there's a lot of good things about compost. One thing that I keep hearing is that once people start collecting their scraps for the compost and they see them all in one place, they immediately start realizing how much food they're actually waste goes to waste, and it starts to get them thinking about ways to even reduce what's going to the compost. I remember how I got started really, waking up to all of this is that I was, if you all remember the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, well, a food waste expert suggested to all of us in her circle that we collect our food scraps for a week and then videotape ourselves with the scraps going over our head. And one side, here in New York City, they pick up trash 3 times a week. So, it's kind of constantly in and out of the apartment. But when you collect for an entire week, you're really surprised at how much we go through. So that's something that you can suggest to anyone you're trying to inspire is just say, just collect it for a week, see what happens, Yeah. How are we doing, Liz? Any other questions or comments?
Yeah. I
Liz-
do, Mary. It's Mary again.
Mary, hi. Okay.
I loved your idea, particularly in the terms in COVID and post-COVID, and all of us doing exponentially more takeout than we ever even imagined in our wildest dreams. I loved your idea of the responsibility of the restaurateur, the purveyor of the takeout, having some instruction on what to do with the leftovers, like your comment about heating up pizza in a micro. I is there any educational push being given to these takeout places about that?
I I asked that of all of you who are out on the East End,
Yeah.
if you have seen any of the takeout places trying to reduce food waste or packaging waste for that matter too, but that's a different subject.
I have not, but because but I didn't think of it. So I think a
Uh-huh.
lot of them haven't thought of it. I mean, it wouldn't be that difficult or expensive for them to do, and I think exponentially of benefit.
And I think during COVID, a lot of us realized that we practiced what's called intentional leftovers, is to,
Yes,
for
yes,
convenience
yes,
purposes, we ordered
yes,
double on the
yes,
takeout
yes,
delivery, so we would have the food on
yes,
hand. So that's
yes,
a whole nother kind
yes,
of
yes,
leftovers called intentional leftovers. So you would think it would
yeah.
behoove the takeout people to try to get you to double up on your order and show you how to make sure that they tasted good the next day, or how they could be repurposed into another kind of a meal.
Do you have a piece that you've written about this that perhaps we could get in a local paper or our local papers?
Well, what I actually drafted today is an article for the Shelter Island Reporter to
There
run
you go.
about this conference tonight, and it includes my 3 wishes. So I can make, it'll be in the, let's assume it'll be in the Reporter next week, Mary. And
Well, I think there are a couple other local papers out here we might be able to get it into and just do some email blasts or talk to our restaurateurs. I mean, as I said earlier, and not to take up your time, but you're inspiring.
terrific. Yeah, no, one of the reasons why I do this, and it's just really a labor of love, it's not so laborious, but just a lot of pleasure, is because people have told me that they've started looking at their meals and their trash and their compost a lot differently ever since they saw this presentation. So I'm inspired myself. I'm motivated. I'm
Well,
energized by the
thank
feedback.
you so much, really. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Now we have a couple of more minutes, and there's, like 50 people here on the call. Who would like to say something?
believe-
Susan Yeager, there you are. Hi, Susan. Thanks for coming. Introduce yourself, please. And you've got to unmute, Susan. Unmute first. There you go. Nope, not yet. Keep unmuting. Can't hear you yet. There we go.
Yeah. Now you can?
Yes,
Can-
we can. Please
Oh,
introduce yourself,
yay.
Susan.
Okay. Thank you so much for what you're doing, Jacquelyn. I am an adjunct professor in the Food Studies and Nutrition Department at NYU. So you can imagine how near and dear what Jackie is doing is to my heart. Just a couple of comments I want to make. Firstly, to Ann Howard, I think that's a wonderful initiative, and I will probably try to get in touch with you. That's a great thing that you're doing. Secondly, Jackie, just very quickly, you make me think of, I don't know if you know my friend Arthur Schwartz. He has written a number of cookbooks, and a number of years ago, he wrote a book called What to Cook When You Have Nothing in the House. And
Oh,
so
wow.
much of what
Okay.
you're saying, now this is a few decades ago, you might even want to look into that,
Sure.
reminds me of that. And I think the more that most of us can, instead of making that extra trip to the store and all, just look around your house. And as you say, it's so easy to put a frittata together. I did have a couple of old peppers in the refrigerator and an onion, and you make a frittata and a salad, and you have dinner using up what is in the house. So I think that's all wonderful, but also listening to you, Jackie, it's so clear to me that, I mean, you really care about food, you respect food, and probably everyone listening here does as well. And I was thinking to myself, I mean, I'm sure you know this, Jackie, that in France, food waste is minimal. I want to say it's at 13%. in France compared to what it is in America, in addition to which it is illegal in France for supermarkets to throw away food. You know, what Anne is doing, collecting the food, that's fantastic. She has to do it. People have to do it because it's not against the law to just throw away good food as it is in France. So the more people are educated about this and fight for it and fight for caring about their food, the better they'll be. So thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed this a lot.
Susan, do you want to tell people the name of the course that you teach?
Oh, well, for many years, I've been teaching a course called Sustainability on the East End of Long Island. It's a graduate seminar for food studies, masters, occasionally doctoral candidates, but generally masters candidates.
So when I found that Susan did this and we hadn't even met yet, I said, I
And
got to find
exactly,
Susan to get her on the call tonight.
Yeah, so glad you did. I really enjoyed
I'm
it.
so glad you made it, Susan. Is
Thank
there anyone else who would like to share anything about an initiative that they're involved in, or make a pitch or share an idea? Karen, would you like to share something?
Just quickly, with leftover bagels. For my grandchildren last year, I had leftover just the plain bagels, and I sliced them really thin and I used them to make French toast. And for one of the grandchildren, I put an egg in the hole in the middle. So not only did it get French toast, but they got a nice soft boiled egg. And I found that a really fun way to repurpose bagels, leftover bagels, which, as you all know, get very hard. But when they're soaked in egg, they get very soft and they're nice French toast.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Karen. You know, I've been researching this topic now for about 5 years, and as one of the real wonderful things is just hearing about the little quirky family traditions that go on. You know, it's the grandmother and the grandfather and dad and what have you, dad for breakfast on Saturday morning kind of a thing, that is just makes this all so charming and heartwarming, and it just unlimited creativity and eccentricity. It's terrific. So any other ideas? We're almost getting up to 8 o'clock. But if anyone or anybody has a favorite recipe or a favorite way, or what's their go-to for leftovers, I'll admit mine's the fried rice. I have fried rice 3 times a week. I can't get enough fried rice.
I always tend to do like a curry, just like with vegetables and then like a sauce. And sometimes you can get like a good like sauce base at like the store even. And that's what I tend to go to.
Nice, nice. Well, that's why I said I'd love it if we could have every high school kid graduate just knowing one of the 7 dishes. Just empower them, and that becomes their go-to. They just need one of them.
Well, I can think of an 8th way to use up leftover vegetables. About once or twice a week, I clean out my vegetable drawer and I roast every one of those vegetables all together with a little salt and olive oil, and it turns vegetables that are on the edge into delicious caramelized side dish.
Absolutely.
So roasting.
And you know, putting the fruit as it you know gets sweeter and sweeter as it ages, and they say the blackest bananas are the sweetest of all. You know, there are a lot of food that goes to waste because people think it's, you know, there's the bread is dry, the bananas are black, but there's always things you can do with them. I've heard of people do things with banana peels.
Something I do is any residue in the pan, vegetable liquid, juices, all go into a container and I keep adding to it. They stay in the freezer and it looks like something geological. But
Strata.
But when you're making soup, you throw a couple of those containers into the soup stock, and it's huge amounts of flavor.
Tremendous.
And nutrition probably in there as well.
Well, I think they call it vegetable liqueur. I save the the green water after steaming vegetables, and I put it into the jar in the fridge. And it was a college friend of mine who's raised 4 children on a farm in Indiana and put them all through 4-H, and they learned that the vitamin A in the vegetables is water soluble. And when you throw away that green water from, steaming the spinach or the broccoli or something, you're throwing all kinds of wonderful vitamins as well as the flavor away. I save it. I save it.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah. So it's a little after 8 o'clock, and I appreciate that we can go a little bit over here. I see lots and lots of emails in the chat here for people who want that PDF. So I'm going to say last call for the PDF. If you want to put your email in the chat, if you do want to, contact me directly, it's in the chat as well, Jacquelyn Ottman at Gmail, and love to hear from you directly. And if you have any groups that you're associated with that you'd like the same presentation to be given to them, just give me a holler. I'd love to do it.
Leftover meatball goes into the spaghetti sauce.
The meatballs go in the spaghetti?
No, meat, when you have a meatloaf, you make a meatloaf, you can only eat so much of it, or you can fry it, make sandwiches. Anything left over when you're cooking spaghetti, you put it in the spaghetti sauce.
Oh, there you go. You put it in the sauce. Absolutely. Why not? Why not? Okay, so I'm going to turn it back to you, Liz. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming and for having such a nice discussion.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Jacquelyn, for this wonderful presentation. If your email was put in the chat, I'm collecting that list and we'll get that PDF to you.
And thank you again, everybody. Wonderful to be back to Shelter Island, if only virtually tonight. Bye-bye. Good luck with your happy cooking, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Good night.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you. One. The other last emails thrown in the chat. All right.